Hey everybody, this is our next lesson following the loss of credibility in which we try to regain respect and power with Presidents Reagan and Bush. So let's go over our learning targets so that we kind of can see how we're trying to learn or re-earn respect. First way is we want to work on society. We'd like to regain respect and credibility from society, respect for the government, for the economy, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that was limited by some failures. So let's get started. For society, here's some of the ways that the administration tried to regain society's respect for our society, for people living within the United States and around the world. The first thing was something called the Moral Majority. And the Moral Majority is an organization that promoted all types of things, basically moral living. Part of the Moral Majority was it was a conservative group, promoted conservative living. It had a Just Say No to Drugs campaign, promoted ratings on music, like we have ratings on movies. And it also had an abstinence campaign that was part of it. The Moral Majority, the thing it was the most successful at was the ratings on music, because we now have that. Even though it didn't happen back in the 80s, it did happen later. Also, other ways that we wanted to show that we were still a society that believed in equality and justice was the promotion of two justices to the Supreme Court who were from minority groups. Sandra Day O'Connor is the first female Supreme Court justice, and then Clarence Thomas, he will also be a second justice, African American justice appointed, even though he will have a set of hearings in which we will learn that there were some charges of sexual harassment against him. However, he will still be confirmed despite these hearings. Also, some of the ways that society sort of progresses and gains more, I guess, appreciation for the government is when the internet is released in 1991. For the first time, you could go online. And then finally, in the Bush administration, an Americans with Disabilities Act will be passed that will basically protect the rights of disabled Americans to get jobs that they can still do. So as you see, for all these types of pieces of legislation, most of them, it's pretty good stuff, that regains society's respect for the government. Let's talk a little bit about how the government tried to gain respect for itself. When Ronald Reagan came into office, he was seen as the man in the white hat, the cowboy riding in to fix all our problems, and he was going to literally make America great again. That was his slogan. He first used it, and Donald Trump bought the rights to it to use it. And so the Strategic Defense Initiative was his way of beefing up our defense system, and one portion of that was a Star Wars program, which was a type of defense program that used, defense mechanisms in space. Some of them were intercept systems, and the most well-known intercept system is the Patriot system, which was developed right here in Huntsville, Alabama. So building up our defenses and looking strong. During this time, the USSR is beginning to go through some problems. They're having some economic issues, kind of like we had in the 70s, and so their leader enforces a reform program called Glasnost, and within this there are political reforms which give people more political freedoms. There are economic reforms that come with this, and this started about 1985. President Reagan will go to Berlin in Germany and begin to put pressure on the USSR to tear down the Berlin Wall so that people in Germany have more freedom. And he makes a speech there at the Berlin Wall called the Tear Down This Wall speech, very famous speech. And then in President Bush's presidency, the Berlin Wall will actually fall. It will be torn down in 1989, and a lot of people see this and the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. This is when the Cold War ends. This is the end of the Cold War. And a lot of people think that, basically we won the Cold War because we put pressure on these on the USSR to make these changes. The USSR is no more. It is now a commonwealth of independent states, with Russia being the most powerful. Also, we will have a war that will occur in the Bush presidency, Operation Desert Storm. It was actually Operations Desert Shield and Storm that occurred in 1991, in which we will go to protect Kuwait against the attack on it from Iraq and Saddam Hussein, who went there to basically get control of the oil there and also get access to a water port. We will go there as part of a UN defense to protect that small country from Iraq and get Saddam Hussein out of there. Very short military campaign. Is actually the shortest one in United States history, even shorter than the Spanish-American War. This picture is one of my favorites. It shows the people sitting on top of the Berlin Wall. Respect for the economy or improvements to the economy. We were in a recession in 1982, shortly after Reagan came into office, and he came up with a program called supply side economics. This has to do with giving tax cuts to businesses so that they can create more jobs, in the hopes that those jobs and good pay would trickle down to regular Americans. A lot of people thought it was a little bit short-sighted because it only attempted to help the businessman, didn't really reach out to the individual. So, limits and failures of this era in gaining respect and credibility. And at the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency, toward the end, there will be something called the Iran-Contra affair. And this is a investigation into weapon sales to Iran. And what will come out of this is that the Reagan administration was basically supplying Iran with weapons, and that money was then being used to fund other communist, the fight against other communists in Latin America. And so it's a complicated affair. We're going to look into it a little bit more deeply. However, it did put kind of a bad mark on the Reagan presidency, because it showed that there was quite a bit of corruption within the Reagan presidency. In fact, he had more people in his administration who had had charges brought against them than any other president in United States history. Also, civil rights. We still have issues with police brutality and civil rights. This is Rodney King, who was beat up by the police on March 3rd, 1991, caught on tape. These police officers will actually be charged, and then the jury will find them not guilty. This will result in a set of riots in the city of LA. And it's just a really bad situation, and it does show us once again they have a long way to go as far as civil rights and respect and credibility in our justice system. We will enter a new recession in 1992 with President Bush being in office. He will lose his credibility because he will tell everybody that he's not going to raise taxes, and which is exactly what he ends up doing, and actually will end up causing him to lose the election of 1992. So, this is all about the attempts of the United States to restore credibility and respect in the 1980s, early 90s. Sort of a mixed bag. We have some successes with society, some with the government, not so much with the economy, and still some issues with civil rights. So I hope you learned something about this era, and I will see you in the next lecture.